welcome to Wise Choices, and welcome to my home as well, my office. And it's lovely, isn't it? You can all see where everybody actually lives rather than sitting in our offices for a change. And the question to ponder really for the next hour and 15 minutes that we have is, when we're choosing, who is doing the choosing? And that's the real question, really, I think we want to explore this morning. And before we get into that, what I'd like to do is really just attune to where we all are today. So if you could all actually just sit with your feet on the floor, feel your back straight, and actually be aware of your body actually sitting on the chair. Feel the weight of your body on the chair, and start to become aware of your breath. So really just become more aware of your breath. Don't control the breath, just be aware of the breath, just naturally. Yeah, as you're breathing in through your nostrils and you're breathing out, and you're just allowing yourself to tune in to the natural breath. So we want to commit both to your physical and to your mental and to your spiritual presence this morning, so that you're here, your mind isn't thinking about what happens next, isn't thinking about where you've come from, what you have to do for the rest of the day, that for the next hour and 15 minutes, you're here. You're really here. The breath is that fundamental link between the mind and the body. And it's the connection between the mind and the body that's really important in terms of answering that question, who is doing the choosing? So as you keep focusing on your breath, I want to start with a poem. And it's a wonderful poem by one of my favourite poets called William Stafford. And it's called Being a Person. So while I'm reading this poem, you're really welcome to close your eyes if you're happy to do that. Just keep focusing on your breath. Focus on the breath coming in, going out, and just relaxing your weight into the chair. Being a person. Be a person here. Stand by the river, invoke the owls. Invoke winter, then spring. Let any season that wants to come here make its own call. After that sound goes away, wait. A slow bubble rises through the earth and begins to include sky, stars, all space, even the outracing, expanding thought. Come back and hear the little sound again. Suddenly, this dream you are having matches everyone's dream, and the result is the world. If a different call came, there wouldn't be any world, or you, or the river, or the owls calling. How you stand here is important. How you listen for the next things to happen. How you breathe. How you listen for the next things to happen. How you breathe. We've been forced to slow down, and in many ways that's a good thing. And this morning, really, it's about attending to that different pace in order to hear differently, in order to challenge yourselves to go beyond that analytical left brain intellectual mind into that much deeper unconscious intuitive space. And really that's what William Stafford is challenging us to do in that poem. Being a person is about how we listen for those next things to happen. And he gives us the clue, how you breathe. If we're running at 1,000 miles an hour, and if we're worrying about every little thing, we can't hear that intuitive unconscious voice. And that's that voice of wisdom that, if we tune into it, has the answers that we need. But the problem is we can't hear it if there's too much noise. Now, we are bombarded, aren't we, with information, with technology, which is a great thing, but it also opens the door to an awful lot of noise. And we receive more information in one day than the 14th century man did in his lifetime. Now just think about that. More information in one day than the 14th century man did in his lifetime. So we're losing connection with that deepest intuitive self by tuning in to far too much stuff that really doesn't hold the wisdom that we need. And as John introduced this session, we all know we're in a very difficult space. But actually, we've been in a difficult space for quite a while. You know, the planet and the problem was with the planet have been coming. There's just an exaggerated catastrophe, you know, today. But these problems have been there for quite a while. And we all have a responsibility to choose a positive future. But how do we choose, and who's doing the choosing? So this session really is about tuning into that intuitive unconscious self that has a great wisdom. But the wisdom lies in attending to that present moment and actually anchoring ourselves into our physical self through the breath. So we're going to look at the nature of the mind. We're going to look at intuitive body wisdom. We're going to look at our inner rock of resilience, which I think we all really would want to harness, don't we, in this really difficult time. And then talk about co-creating with that unconscious self. So what I'd like to hear, and just if you put a question in the chat for me, what's the one thing you've come for? So if you can just put in the chat, just so we can see what sort of things we've got. Okay. Provocation, Mike. Sharing and awakening, John. Intellectual stimulation. Interesting, Mike Payne. Davina, curious, no expectations. Patricia, to make sure I stay on the straight and narrow and make the right choices. Okay, how to decide what is the right choice, Bernadette. Okay. Interesting, Mike, about intellectual stimulation. Possibly some. Hopefully more on the unconscious in terms of the mystery than the intellectual. Let's see. Mike, how to do the next right thing. Alan, how to become better at discerning between ego and decors. Yes, really important. How do we hear what's the true voice and what isn't? That's really important. And Davina, no pressure there. Let's see, like a challenge. Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. I'll put that down just now. So let's start with, okay, what are we really talking about here in terms of that deeper intuitive self? What is that intellectual mind and what isn't? So just because I know some of you and I don't know all of you, I want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of language before we go any deeper. So I'm just going to share. So some of you may or may not have seen this before, but the idea here that the human psyche has great depth and great mystery, but most of the time our conscious mind really is only aware of between 1% to 5% of what is really actually going on. And where do these numbers come from? If we look at cognitive psychologists, they think like 95% of our thinking, our awareness is unconscious. If we look at Carl Jung, who I'm a big fan of, he would say 99% is unconscious. So somewhere between cognitive psychologists and Carl Jung, you know, 95 to 99% of our behavior and our responses is out of our awareness. So this deeper self is very important to understand, isn't it? Especially when we're talking about choice, because where are we making these choices from? And again, if we're looking at making wise choices or staying on the straight and narrow, Patricia, as you said, or doing the next right thing, Mike, we need to be in touch with what's actually going on in this unconscious. In other words, we need to come down beyond that surface level and into the deeper self. Now, within that deeper self, I talk about big S and little s. So to keep this really simple and to keep the language simple, I talk about the little s as the ego self, which is up here in the conscious mind. And I talk about the big self, or big S, which is that deeper intuitive wisdom, which lives deep, deep down here in that unconscious mind. And often when we dream, that's when we're in touch with that deeper big S, as I call it, because this conscious mind is asleep. Can I have a thumbs up for who dreams and records the dreams? I can't see everybody, so I'm just, how many we've got. We'll talk about that a little bit more. It's an important piece. I won't talk about it too much in this session because it could all be a whole session in itself. But essentially, there's deep wisdom in our dreams. And if you don't pay attention to them, I really advise you to start listening to your dreams and journaling them, because there's deep guidance in those dreams. And I have 20 years worth of my dreams in journals. 20 years I've been recording my dreams. And there's all kinds of wisdom there in the unconscious mind. So what is really happening? We need to then look at how we make this shift from that conscious to the unconscious. What is it that actually we need to do in order to shift that level of consciousness? So the mind really is, you know, that huge mystery, but it's phenomenal if we think about the untapped potential. If we look at this, we think there are solutions to everything. There is great wisdom here. How do we use it? And the problem, of course, is how do we listen to that voice? As you asked, Alan, how do I differentiate between this ego voice up here and this deeper intuitive self down here? And how do I, if you like, minimize the noise from up here? And again, that's that intuitive self. And as Einstein said, John said, I was a chemical engineer, which really is applied physics. So it's about actually transformation of energy, funnily enough. And Einstein actually said the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind a faithful servant. But we've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So that intuitive self is really what we want to tune into in order to hear that guidance. So it's again that trust and connection with that deeper self. So if we look at this in a different way, some of you may or may not be aware, you know, of levels of consciousness and the huge depth of the human mind, you know. And if we look at this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or we map this onto the energy centers of the body in terms of the chakras, or we look at it in some of Robert Kegan's work, you know, he talks about the move from the conditioned mind to the self-authoring mind to the self-transforming mind. Whichever way we want to look at this, there's actually a map that we can use to help us understand where we need to move from. So if we look at this map for a minute and we look at these levels of consciousness on the left, look at the bottom three, and we'll see here, you know, we're moving from that Maslow place of survival, and only when we're out of survival can then we look at what is healthy relationship. And when we're able and comfortable with that, can we actually really then look at that self-esteem? And that whole bottom triangle piece is about security, isn't it? Security in oneself, security in a you know, physical sense, but also security in terms of just that sense of who we are, you know, and that confidence in ourselves. And only when we have that can we actually then start to look at, from that heart-based level, transformation beyond that, moving into that deeper level of consciousness. And it's really around here that we start to actually look at this more deeper intuitive self. Now, that's not to say that we all have to be up here and fully enlightened and everything before any, if you like, enlightened awareness can travel down through here. It's not like that, it doesn't work like that. Not in my experience. In fact, it's quite a messy thing. But it's hard to hear from this level if we're very frightened and worried. Yeah, if we're in this very much this survival place down here. And how many of us, you know, find ourselves on a day-to-day basis worrying, and we're down here. So back to Alan, you asked the question, how do we differentiate between what we're hearing here and where we need to listen, which is up here? So again, this is looking at the stages of development. You know, have we moved out of survival mode into really conforming to what everyone else thinks? Actually, we're differentiating ourselves. Individuating means, who am I? You know, can I stand apart from the crowd? Do I really own, you know, my own mind, and have I actually differentiated myself from the conditioning of my background and my family and the culture that I grew up in? Only when we've done enough of that can we really start to hear that individual voice. So these shifts, if you like, you know, it's not linear, this whole thing at all. In my own experience, it's really quite messy, as I said before. But what we're really talking about here is this shift. Yeah, how do we shift our minds so we get this breakthrough in terms of our awareness? And it's a feeling, it's an intuitive thing when it happens, because as the little chicks there, it's like, oh wow, paradigm shift. You know, it's crikey, what was that? And sometimes those are dramatic, as John alluded to. On the 20th of February 1999, a massive awakening. I mean, mind-blowing. And since then, lots of smaller ones. And, you know, there's just all kinds of different things start happening when you're consciously growing and shifting your awareness, and you're deliberately moving away from your personal history into that fully independent mind. And that's the key. How do I move into a fully independent mind? How much have I moved away from my conditioning? And that's a lifelong process. But as we saw in those levels of consciousness, we can always be traveling and we're always moving. But it's how conscious are we of that? So the big problem here is, how do we quiet that voice, you know, that conscious mind, that little ego-s self? How do we quieten that so that we can really tap in and hear that deeper wisdom? I practice something called Vipassana meditation. It's a very deep practice. I've practiced for 8 years now. And in order to learn Vipassana, we go on a 10-day silent retreat. And it's 240 hours of silence. The BBC World Service have just released a podcast on it, actually, which I can put in the chat for you if you want. And if you want to listen to that, I'll put all these things in the chat at the end. And it's a really good introduction, actually, to what it is. And it is a tough thing. But what we experience on that 10-day retreat is absolute silence. Silence beyond anything I had ever experienced before. And it's allowing ourselves to be in that silence. And then the ego, the little s, doesn't like that. It wants to hang on to control, of course. It wants the distractions. And yet on a 10-day Vipassana course, we don't speak, we don't look at people, we don't write, we don't read. I don't even get to record my dreams. You know, nothing, no distractions whatsoever. You don't have to cook for yourself, you don't have to clean, you don't have to do anything. You literally get up, go to the meditation hall, and you sit in silence. It's an extraordinary thing. And the type of mind shifts that I'm talking about, you can experience in something like that. Now, that's one thing. There are lots of different ways we can access this. You may have other practices. Have you got, any of you, do you practice Tai Chi or meditation or yoga or Kriya yoga? Or put it in the chat. Can I have a look and see what sort of things everybody actually practices already? Yoga, Patricia, yeah. All of the above, Mike Payne. Daily meditation. Alan Spence, nothing, unfortunately. Okay, maybe by the end of today. Occasional mindfulness. Okay, so there's something about commitment to practice. Okay. Does anyone use deep reflection, John? Does anyone use any creative things? Noticing, pausing, Davina. Mike Chitty, meditation, yoga, dog walks, yeah. Do you know, horse riding? I actually ride, and it's a very present thing. If I'm not present when I'm horse riding, that horse is off. Particularly if it's a high-spirited horse, I've had it. So I'm going to be extremely present. John, living in the country, Bernadette, nature, yeah. There are lots of ways to access silence. Alan, gosh, cold water therapy, reading, video diet, tea making. I like, yeah, okay, ritual. Yeah, ritual is another one. Yeah, really good. Swimming, Patricia. Yeah, good. So it's whatever works for you, you know, that's the key. What I'd like to do now is really say, look, an agitated mind cannot be an effective mind, can it? So it's what level of agitation is really there. And until we learn to sit in silence, we're not even aware of how actually agitated our minds are. That's the extraordinary thing you learn on Vipassana. You don't realize the level of sensations that are actually going on in the body. There's 6 trillion chemical changes per second in the human body. I mean, that 6 trillion chemical changes per second in the human body. I'm not aware of that. Are you? Like, there's so many things we're not aware of, and that inner voice is so subtle. So we've got to, in order to elevate the mind and hear that intuitive wisdom, we have to heighten our sensitivity. It's our sensitivity we need to learn to increase. In other words, the ability to feel those subtle sensations in order to hear that subtle voice. So movement is really important in terms of presence, but it's a difficult thing to really heighten sensitivity while we're moving. I've learned that actually through Vipassana. So I love running, I love horse riding. I've now got a new, in lockdown I bought a bike, loving that. I'm going all over the place on a bike. So I enjoy moving, but there's something else about sitting in absolute stillness in terms of heightening sensitivity. And here's why. I just want to share. Those 6 trillion chemical changes per second in the human body, we really can categorize, you know, our responses to these into 3 things and really keep it quite simple. And basically, we're either craving something, you know, so when we're moving, we're attached to sensations. We want something and we respond to that. So again, that creates a noise. Or we don't want something. We react with ill will or hatred. We wish something was other than it was. And again, that creates distraction. So we distract ourselves. Or we're just not even aware at all. You know, there's a whole level of unconsciousness that we're just not even aware of why we're doing what we're doing. And there may be even a dullness even, or a lethargy around, you know, and we just don't even know why. So any one of these 3, we will start to create noise. And what happens when we're sitting in absolute stillness is we become really sensitive to these sensations going on in the body. It's absolutely incredible. And also we recognize where we've got some big energy blocks of past pain and trauma sitting in the body waiting to be released. And again, that sense of how can we feel something if a body is rigid? And that's really important because I come from Glasgow, you know, I come from a working class family in Glasgow, and, you know, poetry and sensitivity wasn't something that was honoured really. I grew up in the early part of my childhood in Easter House. Well, what that does, that rigidity, means your sensitivity is really dulled down. Yeah, we desensitize to things. And really what I want to talk about is really sensitizing ourselves to that. But of course, then we do that, you don't want to get run over, do you? It's not like, and everybody's going to take advantage of you and you just become a doormat. And no, it's not about that at all. It's about sensitivity to yourself and therefore to other beings, sentient beings around you. And then, of course, that subtle voice becomes clearer and purer and calmer. And we just get to know the right way to go. And the guidance in my dreams is so clear and so profound now after 20 years of practice of dream journaling and 8 years of Vipassana. That channel, if you like, gets clearer and stronger. So this is why I asked you about what practice do you have. And some of you have an intermittent practice. That's great. But again, I'll talk later at the end of the session about commitment to practice, because that's when it serves you. It helps you maintain a connection to that source, and also that opens up your sensitivity in a way that the guidance gets stronger and stronger. So I want to do a little practice with you. We're going to do a body wisdom meditation. It's only 10 minutes. And first of all, before we do that, I'd like you to think of a question. So maybe you've come here, we're going to do a group exercise later in terms of things that might be on your mind just now. What I'd like you to do is think of one question that you have just now, and you don't know the answer, but you're pondering this question. frame the question in a way that it's a closed question. So there's either a yes or no answer. That's really important in terms of listening into the body's wisdom. So if you want to grab a piece of paper, and I'll just give you, a minute or so to write down your question. And again, frame it in a way that the answer is either yes or no. Okay, put that paper to one side. And I'd like you to again sit, if you can, with your both feet on the floor. Have your spine straight. Keep your arms just rested. So either have your palms down, palms up, doesn't matter. But again, relaxing your shoulders, your neck. So just feeling the weight of your body in the chair. And if you're comfortable, I'd like you to just gently close your eyes and just tune in again to your breathing. Just be aware of the breath coming into your nostrils and breathing out. And if you can, take your awareness deeper into your body and deeper down into the bottom of your diaphragm. Be aware of your chest expanding with your breath as you breathe in. And as your frame collapsing again as you breathe out, just be aware of the depth of your breath from the bottom of your diaphragm. So you're moving from your head deep down into your body. And just take a couple of deep breaths. All the way in and out through your mouth, all the way out. Again, in and out through your mouth. And don't control your breath, just notice your breath. Breathing deeply and softly and slowly. Now take your attention to your feet. Feel both feet on the floor. And just check for any tension in your feet. And just breathe into any tension that there might be in your feet. And allow the muscles to soften and relax as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your calves. Check for any tension in your calves. Just allow the calf muscles to relax. Breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your knees and your thighs. Feeling the weight of your thighs on your chair. And feeling the strength in your thighs. And yet notice any tension that you might have in your thighs and your knees. And just breathe into any tension and allow the muscles to loosen and soften and relax as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your hips and your buttocks on the chair. Just check for any tension in those really strong glute muscles. And just notice what tension you might be holding there and in your hips. And breathe into that tension and allow the muscles to soften and relax as you breathe deeply and softly and slowly. And now your abdomen. Check for any tension in your abdomen. And just allow your abdomen to soften and relax. And now your heart. Check for any tension in your heart. And just allowing your heart to soften and open as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your shoulders and the back of your neck. Just allowing your shoulders to relax and drop as you check for any tension in your shoulders and your neck. And allowing that tension to release as you relax the muscles and breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your arms and your hands, feel the weight of your hands on your thighs, just allowing your arms and your hands to relax as you're breathing into any tension. And now your jaw. Check for any tension in your jaw and just allow your jaw just to relax and drop as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your eyes. Check for any tension in your eyes, allowing your eyelids to be relaxed yet heavy as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And now your scalp, the crown of your head. Check for any tension you might be holding in your scalp and the crown of your head and your forehead. And just allowing the scalp and the forehead to soften and relax as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. Your whole body just breathing quietly, soft and relaxed. And quietly, in your own mind, ask yourself the question that you've just written down. Allow your body to answer. Check for any tightening or relaxing of muscles, any tingling, any hot, any cold, any colours or pictures. Just notice as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And again, ask a question and allow your body to answer. Just notice any sensation, any change at all, any tightening or relaxing of muscles, any hot or cold, any colours or sounds or pictures. Just notice as you're breathing deeply and softly and slowly. And one last time, ask your question and allow your body to answer. Checking for any sensation, any change at all. Just notice. Take a deep breath in, out through your mouth. And then again, breathe into your nose, out through your mouth. Start to move your fingers and your toes. Breathe in again. And out through your mouth softly. Open your eyes and come back into the space. Now just quietly, just take a minute just to note down anything at all that you noticed when I asked your question, you to answer your question. Just take a minute, just jot down anything at all you noticed. Before I ask you to put whatever you'd like to share in the chat, who notices the difference in their presence now, even just after doing, you know, that 10 minutes, in terms of how you actually feel, in terms of your sense of presence or peace, or just that sense of calm? You know, who notices a change? A hands up. Who's got a? Yeah, most of you. The lovely thing about doing this in a group where we're physically present is we can feel the change in the room itself. So one of the things about, doing Zoom is obviously we're not in a collective space, so we can't feel so much the collective energy. It's still there. You know, we certainly can connect like this, even at a distance. But that sense of calmness in the room after doing that is poignant. You know, we can really feel it when we're in a physical group. But I think there's still a degree we can feel it within ourselves, and obviously feel it even when we're in a virtual space, you know, like this. So it shows we can connect with each other still. So again, just for the rest of the day, even, can you even be aware of this definite shift in that sense of presence and calm? Because again, this is this shift from the noise of the ego self, the little s, into the quieter wisdom space of the big S self. And it's this kind of feeling that shows us we're moving into that space. The shift in consciousness is actually a felt thing. We can feel the change. I can feel the change when I shift my mind into a deeper place in meditation. It's actually a felt thing because the body is aware of it. Going back to the slide I showed earlier about sensations, you know, that our body, back to the 6 trillion chemical changes in the body every second. We are an incredibly sentient being, so sensitive, but the mind being rigid and harsh is why we can't hear it. So when we shift like we've just done, even a fraction, we're moving into that space, that wiser space. If you're happy to, in the chat, would you like to share what you noticed when you asked your question? Just to see what kind of things people noticed. White light, Mike. A true or honest response. That's lovely, Patricia. It's that truth. Yeah, calmness, Bernadette. Centered, John. Warmth, tumbling, Ramitra. Red and orange. Interesting, Mike. Interesting what your question was. If you've got warmth. Mike, stomach flip, nervous excitement, and then back to tension, strongest on the first. So again, that sense of what's going on in the gut feeling, intuitive. Lost focus on my question or what I thought it was. Okay, that's all right. A feeling that it was okay to be in the fog, Davina. Yeah, okay. What's interesting about colour, some people actually see colour quite strongly. And again, if you're aware of energy centres and chakra colours, I would encourage you to have a look at, you know, what those colours actually mean in terms of mapping. But if I were to just really simply just say to you all, you know, if you get a warmth or an excitement feeling, if most of you think the answer to that would, whatever the question was yes, do you want to give me a thumbs up? If you get a warmth and an excitement. So it's really easy, isn't it, to sort of tune in and think, well, actually that's a yes. You know, my body, the wisdom of my physical body is saying yes. And if I get tension and restriction and a heavy feeling then generally, it's probably a negative response. You might want to really think carefully about whatever, you know, that question is. It's as simple and as subtle as that. But the intellect overcomplicates. Now, I'm not saying for a minute we don't use the intellect. What I'm saying is it rules the roost far too much. Back to the Einstein quote, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honours the servant, in other words, the rational mind, and has forgotten the gift. So the intellect is important, we need it. I'm very grateful for my mind. My mind is what got me out of Easter House and was the first person to go to university in my family. And I'm very grateful for the power of my intellectual mind. But, as Einstein said, it's supposed to be the faithful servant. And unfortunately, it dominates. And that's why we can't tune into that subtle guidance. It overrides. So to tune in, we need to learn how to be quiet and listen. So that's a very simple 10-minute body wisdom meditation. You know, you can take yourself through that. And I have an MP3 file on that, you know, to take you through it if you need a voice to take you through it, but you can take yourself through it. And it's just 10 minutes, but it's really focusing, you know, if you like, that 10 minutes of awareness on a question. And if you frame it with a yes or no answer, then you've actually got more of a guidance, if you like, of that response from your physical self. So I want to shift now from that sense of self and that sense of tuning into oneself into actually what starts to happen here in the outer wider world. Making wise choices was what this session was all about. And what happens, you know, when we feel like we're not in control and we're not making wise choices and everybody else seems to be doing okay and I'm not. I want to share something from Professor Wiseman. So Professor Richard Wiseman did a study on lucky people. So I really like this. And it's this whole idea of, even in the midst of such chaos, can we actually train ourselves to do these things? So he found that lucky people expected good outcomes, so they anticipated good things would happen. There's a really interesting thing here about, do we actually expect, you know, that the goodness of the universe, if you like, is something real? Do we really know that? You know, do we actually, even in all the pain and all the suffering, do we really know that underneath that is goodness? Now that's an interesting question. And again, back to Einstein, he said, you know, one of the biggest changes in attitude is whether or not you believe the universe is friendly or not. And that's a challenge, isn't it, to our attitudes, especially when things are tough. You know, so can we stay out of that survival thinking and go, okay, I can tune into something wise within myself and I can expect a good outcome. He also found that they noticed opportunities. So when we're calmer and our mind is relaxed, we see so much more. We're much more aware. Opportunities are all around, but again, if we've got that very restricted mind in survival mode, we won't see them. And again, if we have a very rigid view on how things should be, we won't notice opportunities either. Because often things don't go the way they expect, do they? You know, and we take paths we would never have imagined in a million years. I know in my own life, you know, 20 years of very strange paths at times, which if you've got the courage to follow, they lead to really, really interesting places. And notice the third one he found, they listened to their gut feeling. So they tuned into that intuitive self. And finally, they coped with negative events and bounced back. So it's this bouncing back thing, again, that really I think is important when things don't go how we plan. And we're, you know, and I am in 20 years of this kind of work, you know, there's a reason I started doing all this. I know what it's like to be on your knees. I know what it's like to have really difficult things to overcome, not just from personal history, but in life too. These things happen. Yeah, so trauma is a real thing. Difficulty is a real thing, but without problems, we don't grow. It's an unfortunate thing, isn't it, about human species? We don't learn from, we learn from pain. It's just how it is. But our ability to cope with negative events and bounce back is really what, you know, we want to have a look at. So really, we can put, some of you may have already seen this, and you know, it's too simplistic, I know, to sort of say I can put everything down into formula, but it's always helpful, I think, to have something really simple to use. And you know, the events of your life plus the response is the outcome that you get. It really is, you know, that sense of personal mastery is really how much can you master your own mind, that you're moving out of fear and negativity into positivity and love. And that love starts with yourself, actually, you know, that sense of being able to calm and center myself. And it is a choice. It really is a choice. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to break into groups, and I'd like you to do an exercise, and this is this thing about self-esteem. So if we go back to remembering those levels of consciousness, and we looked at the survival, relationship, and self-esteem before the transformational point. The tipping point is at that bottom triangle, you've got a solid sense of self. You've moved out of that survival thing. And in order to do that, we need awareness. So what I'd like you to do in your groups is, what's the one thing you worry about most today? And then things that raise your self-esteem, things that lower your self-esteem, and what of those things do you have control over? And I'd like you to break into a group for about 15 minutes about how we shift from that ego little s, as I call it, which has a fearfulness about it, which creates a lot of noise and distraction. How do we shift from listening to that voice into that big S, as I call it, to keep it really simple? And their ability to consciously be aware of where are we tuning into is really important. So that exercise I've just done around, you know, what worries me most, where's my esteem, where's my sense of personal power, how empowered am I in terms of making choices, is really just to highlight, you know, what is really going on in our minds on a minute-to-minute basis. And of course, back to the 6 trillion chemical changes per second in the human body, there is so much noise going on. We're not even aware of most of it. So we need to practice regularly in order to anchor the mind into the body by means of the breath. So my top tips, 5 of them. It's now. And those of you that already practice some of these things know this, you know, peace, wisdom, and power lies in now. But what is that? You know, it's about staying focused, centered, and positive so that we help ourselves and therefore we can help others. We can't help others if we're not in that place ourselves. Now, in order to do that, it means practice mindfulness. Not talk about it or read about it. At some point, reading actually becomes a distraction as well. Be careful, you know, too much feeding the intellect and not enough practice. So we need to learn to calm the mind. We can't solve problems in survival mode. Even though the fear may be high with all of the uncertainty that we have, but there's a beautiful Pali word in Vipassana, and it's anicca, A-N-N-I-C-C-A, anicca, and it means impermanence. Those 6 trillion chemical changes per second in the body shows how impermanent everything is. Nothing is fixed, not even us. And to really freak you out, I felt that in my own sense of self in a meditation, where I'm literally just bubbles arising and passing away, microseconds. We're not even solid ourselves. I've experienced that. I've read it, but I've experienced it. So the third, trust intuition, deep within. We shut the door on distraction and then we shift perspective. Levels of consciousness is about conscious choice. Can I consciously shift my perception from that little s to that big S? That's where your practice comes in. That's where deep practice helps you. You literally shut the door on the noise of the little s. And that leads me to personal mastery. If we take responsibility for our state of mind and heart, then how you respond absolutely gives you the outcome that you get. That E plus R equals O. It means personal mastery first. Am I fully aware of what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm choosing? Be aware of the breath. The moment you have lost awareness of your breath, you've lost that sense of conscious wisdom. And we lose that all the time, so we've got to keep coming back. And finally, powering up. You know, we didn't really talk about energy so much, but it's pretty obvious, you know, that finding healthy habits, whether it's in rest or moving distraction, whatever works for you. But I'll tell you, one really is important. Surround yourself with the right people in the right environment that nourish you body, mind, and heart. You know, your soul needs like-minded people, particularly in times like these. And one of the great things about being able to connect on something like this is we can connect with anybody, anywhere. So finding those people who nourish you, help you, to really be the best of yourself. Real mastery is that sense of tuning into that big S and really listening deeply from there. And finally, it's our everyday choices that demonstrate who we truly are. Don't give in to fear. Listen deeply and choose wisely. But come back to the breath. Am I focused? Am I centered? Where is my attitude? And if I choose from there, the chances are it's going to be okay. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah, a large part of my work is the sort of body-mind stuff. I do work as a body-mind coach as well as a massage therapist. So, trying to bring a lot of what you've been talking about, I guess, to life for individuals is a large part of what I work on.
Great, brilliant. Yeah, we need it, don't we? More people that are, and the beautiful wisdom of the body is incredible.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We take it for granted, I think.
Exactly.
Ignore it a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, that beautiful thing, but the sentient, the fact that seeing it differently, I think, seeing that the body is a shimmering web of energy. If we can even just realize, that as we're walking about, it's a beautiful image, I think, for us to try and remember.
I think the really sad thing, though, is that we've sort of lost that understanding. Certainly, I think in the sort of Western world, like Mike was saying, where Descartes had created that duality. And I think even now, isn't it? As soon as you start to talk about energy to people, either it's a physical, physics thing, or else it's this woo-woo sort of weird stuff that, you must be daft or silly or something if you believe in all of that. And yet, as you say, it's the whole thing is intertwined. It's entirely real.
Right. And absolutely, Kerry, and it's experience of it that, what's your experience of this? And again, even just doing, I don't know if did you join the 10-minute meditation? I don't think you did.
No, I missed that.
Did the body wisdom?
Yeah.
And really, that's just a very simple introduction exercise that I do, just to help people, just for the very basics of how am I listening to what this shimmering web of energy is telling me. And it's not just a lump of muscle and bone, it's so much more. And feel it, because when they've experienced that, then it's a whole other ball game. Oh, right, okay, there's a lot more going on here then, and how do I work with it?
And even at a very simple level at first, when I see clients and they get on the table and we do a little bit of just body scanning, and people just are never really used to that at all, isn't it? They're not in touch with their bodies. They just don't feel what they feel. They don't know what they're feeling. And it takes a long time sometimes for some just to really start to sense and get a feel for their bodies, if you know what I mean.
So one of the things I talked about was that heightened sensitivity is really sharpening them so that the mind can feel the subtlest of sensations. That's what the gift of Vipassana for me is, that the beauty of practicing Vipassana. The mind becomes so sharp to the subtlest of sensations. It's incredible. And so the video, John and Bernadette, I'm talking, the podcast, only came out last week. It was just serendipity.
Whereabouts are you based, Juliet?
North of Edinburgh. I'm in South Queensferry. So this is the podcast. This is the BBC Heart and Soul podcast. And then it's there, Vipassana, 240 Hours of Silence. So that's the one that would be lovely to share with everyone.
Actually, something else which you might have come across. It's called a moment of mass mindfulness. That is a movement that is, well, certainly national here, but I think it's also international. And if you Google that, there's a website for it. And it's something that I've been part of in Leeds. So we've had the Leeds moment of mass mindfulness, where certainly last year and this year, we've actually been trying to, in a sense, it's sort of bringing mindfulness practices and meditation to the public, in a sense. But it's also just as a process, getting people to come together in one space, and this year we actually ended up having to do it in virtual space, which was interesting. But it's also connected to this thing, as you're saying, about how do people actually get a sense of connection, not only then with themselves and bringing that practice inside, but then thinking, well, what does that connection actually mean in my community, in my workplace, and so on.
Yeah.
So that's sort of led into and been tied into something in Leeds, which has been developing sort of alongside this and separately around something called the kindness revolution. So this whole thing around community,
yeah.
And how actually are we thinking about we can be kinder to people, and what does that actually mean? And I think there's a whole thing going on now, isn't there? I think internationally as well, you sort of see it worldwide about all of these concepts, which is interesting. I think that all these things are starting to come together in different ways.
It's the trust in the beauty of the mystery, isn't it, Jerry? I think as well, that the more that, and I love that moment of mass mindfulness. Have a look. I don't know.
Have a look.
But for me, that sense of practical, I have a real, how do we integrate our spiritual reality into everyday life? How do we bring these practices into matter? How do we integrate them into our businesses, into everyday work lives, into communities, in a way that is real? So I have a lot of my work is about saying, okay, I work without being afraid now, actually, to own that word. I work in a spiritual way. It's about soul making at work. But how do we make it manifest in reality? How do we know, we're working in that way? And how do we feel it as well? What's the difference that we start to notice in the atmosphere around? And are people developing those different qualities within themselves? Compassion, kindness, joy, creativity. These things start blossoming, and even in the midst of all of what's happening, those seeds can grow, and they must grow.